There's a huge update for one of Newcastle United's goalkeeper targets. The price has been set for the man they want at right midfield, and we'll also discuss Anthony Gordon's current situation on this video as well. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to another video on the channel, and thanks so much for the continued support. If you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe. It really does help, as I keep saying, trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season, or earlier in the summer at least. I really appreciate the growth of the channel. There's about 50 or 60 new subscribers over the last month, which is absolutely brilliant. About 6,000 views as well. Looking to really turbocharge everything this summer with a huge content plan, the biggest yet. So please do get involved if you haven't already. It does make a massive difference. There's three things we're going to touch on really in this video, and the first one is an update that I actually have myself. This is news that I can actually bring you. I don't know if it's an exclusive. I don't want, I'm not somebody who professes to be in the know too much. I do have some news that is relevant to Newcastle United. They are very, very much interested, as we know, in Espanyol goalkeeper Juan Garcia. And it's been reported a lot that he's got a €30 million, £25 million buyout clause at the end of the season. I have it on good authority that if Espanyol get relegated this season, that release clause does halve, which means that he'll be available for £12.5 million or €15 million, which would do Newcastle a huge favour. And it's a really, really interesting one. It's because I said in the last video, I think that a goalkeeper isn't as high on the agenda as a striker because of the situation that was laid bare in the Arsenal defeat. Nick Pope is still a very good goalkeeper in terms of shot stopping and commanding his area and coming out and sweeping up. I think he showed that against Arsenal. Obviously his distribution is really why Newcastle need to build up, and because they want to build up from the back, they need a goalkeeper who can do that. Juan Garcia is very much in that mould. He's very good with his feet, he's very good at commanding his area, coming out from the back, but also, as you'll see with some stats that I've got off FB Ref, he's really, really in the high percentiles for very basic goalkeeper things, like 90th percentile for crosses stopped. He comes and claims a lot of crosses. 75th percentile for penalties saved. 84th percentile for save percentage. An 86th percentile for post shots expected goals minus goals allowed. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's explained on FB Ref as positive numbers suggest better luck and above average ability to stop shots. So he's very good at the basics of being a goalkeeper, as well as being very commanding of his area and very good with the ball at his feet. He's 24 years old, and he really does feel like the next progression in terms of a goalkeeper to Nick Pope, in terms of he's good at what Pope does, but also has that progression with the ball at his feet. He's ready for the next level. He's been heavily linked with a number of clubs, Manchester United, Barcelona, the Arsenal as well. Reports in the Spanish media that Newcastle had tied up a deal. I don't think that's quite accurate, but Newcastle, if they are interested, have a real opportunity to get a great deal here, because he could be available for €15 million, £12.5 million. There is a caveat to that. Espanyol need to get relegated. Either them or Leganés at the bottom, as you can see, will get relegated. They play Las Palmas, who have already gotten down. They're 3 points above the drop zone, so it's unlikely that they'll go down, because obviously they would fancy their chances of winning that game. But if they do, there's a real opportunity. And to be honest, at €30 million, you're not going to find many better options than Juan Garcia. But as I say, I can reveal that it could be even better than that. They get relegated, there's a real opportunity, and this is the sort of deal, again, I was asked about best practices in that Q&A. This is a great example of that. Reacting quickly, getting this deal done early, that's an opportunity. I think a striker is more important, and I do have plans to do a look at possible striker targets or possible options up front that are alternative. And Newcastle have a situation where they can't really go and get a Delap or a Sesko or a Gyökeres, the strikers that are being linked everywhere, because they've got Isak in front of them. They're going to be creative in terms of that striker berth. So I'm going to do a video on looking at those strikers. But in terms of the goalkeeper, there aren't many better options than Juan Garcia. 24 years old, you'd get a good 10 years out of him if he arrived. He's definitely one of the emerging players. He's already plotting to challenge Unai Simon as the main Spain goalkeeper as well. So there's a huge opportunity. As I say, like I've said with a lot of these targets, Jonathan David, Bryan Mbeumo himself, we'll talk about him in a minute. There's lots of clubs that are interested in these players, and it's very, very difficult to get to the front of this queue. Newcastle have to act quickly. If and when that clause comes available, they need to be there, because that is a deal that you're not going to find a better deal across the summer, really, for the quality of goalkeeper that Juan Garcia is. It's the right profile in terms of the age, but also in terms of the fact that you're gaining a goalkeeper with better possession skills, but also not losing out, crucially, on the command of the area and on the basics of the shot stopping. That's where, as we've seen with the stats on FBref, Juan Garcia really, really does thrive. So I think that this is a deal that should absolutely be considered. If it isn't already, I'm sure it is, but that you're not going to find a better deal than that as well. Another piece of news that's emerging this week is that Manchester United are interested in Bryan Mbeumo, and the price has been set at £54 million for the Brentford player. Now, I know a lot of people think that he's the ideal right-hand side player, and statistically it's really hard to argue with that. 27 goal contributions this year, 19 goals, 8 assists. If you slotted that into Newcastle on the right-hand side, those stats, and you added those 2 ESATS goals to Gordon on the other side, Barnes as well, you would have a team that would already be certain of the Champions League. And on paper, if you added that to this season, where would Newcastle be in terms of even a title race? Because they would have won a lot of the games that they haven't won this season. Stats-wise, I think he's absolutely worth it. And he's got a year on his contract, so £54 million might seem a little bit steep, but I think that's the world Newcastle United have to face now. That with these players, and Mark Gahey's another one who's going to be out of contract in a year. They obviously bid upwards of £65 million for him last summer. Contracts, while they do matter, waning power in terms of what the club can do is true. They still can demand high fees, especially when they rely so heavily on those players. On the evidence of this season, the fact that he's carried them, he can play centrally as well. He really feels like he slots into that team. I think I've spoken about Kubo, and there's other options as well. But for £54 million, I think Newcastle have to be realistic and think if they've got a huge amount of money to spend on a player this summer, they should absolutely consider making it Mbeumo. We'll talk about Anthony Gordon in a minute. I don't think you can expect 19 goals and 8 assists next season from Mbeumo. White players are historically quite inconsistent, but the fact that he's improved and grown and become this player over a number of years and become Brentford's talisman shows that he's ready for the next stage. And I think Newcastle are a perfect fit. Manchester United are interested. They seem to be doing a lot more sort of unglamorous business from clubs that are more mid-table or at the bottom of the league. Obviously they're in talks with Liam Delap. Newcastle are also interested. That looks unlikely. Mateus Cunha, they look like they're pretty much done with that as well. Again, another deal that Newcastle would have loved to have done, but Mbeumo's been scouted a lot. He's really increasingly looking like at least Eddie Howe's top target. So I imagine that this is the deal that Newcastle would love to do, because as I say, it solves that right hand side issue. As much as I'd love Kubo, I can't really sit here and say that I'd be more comfortable saying that he would hit the ground running. I think maybe his ceiling is a bit higher than Mbeumo's. That's what I would argue. But Mbeumo is the right age profile, perfect for that right hand side. That's where he thrives. He scored goals from there. He can also play down the middle as well. He just sort of ticks every box. And for £54 million to not worry about that right hand side, that's exactly what Newcastle need, in my opinion, to not have any concerns, to not take any risks. They're at that level where they need to seriously upgrade a number of positions, and I wouldn't be surprised if Mbeumo is that man at that price. Brentford are going to drive a hard bargain. They know how important he is, and they're probably not fearing losing him for free in the current market with the amount of money that's in the Premier League. I think that's the crucial thing now, is that clubs like Palace, like Brentford, Bournemouth, those clubs who have players that others want to buy are not afraid of the contract situation, because there's so much money in the Premier League, it's so deep. They know that they can hold their own. So I think it's fair that Brentford drive a hard bargain, but Newcastle will have to step up quite a lot for that deal. I would assume that they'd be very happy to pay that money, but obviously it could be, there are plenty of options. But for me, Mbeumo for £55 million really doesn't feel like a deal that Newcastle should bulk at, because of that output, that experience, that age profile. He just feels like he slots into that team perfectly. We're going to finish this video by talking a little bit about Anthony Gordon. I don't want to go into too much detail because I've got a piece for Forbes planned coming out tomorrow looking at him in more detail, but there's a real shift in the opinion of him recently. He's struggled. He obviously had a difficult game against Arsenal, but I think lots of fans are pinpointing ever since he's come back, he's not really looked great. Actually, I think that's a little bit harsh. I thought he was really lively early on against Chelsea and sort of exploded into life against Brighton as well on his return. I think this is the first time he's really struggled, and I think lots of people are maybe looking at the stats and saying he's declined a little bit from last season, but as I sort of pinpointed with Mbeumo, and there's a great tweet by Brent Spratt, which I retweeted yesterday, listed a bunch of wingers, including some of the greatest that have ever played in the league, that never got double figures for goals and assists in one season. So that shows how well he did last season, and maybe that's distorting his performance this year. Obviously, there's a lot of narrative around Anthony Gordon with his sending off and his injuries and that move to Liverpool that didn't materialise. Does he want to leave? Is he unhappy? Should he be sold? And I think for me, I think that's all a little bit harsh. I think I think last summer was a huge sliding doors moment. Stephen Dyson, who was kind enough to put a question into the Q&A, commented on my last video asking about this. And I think it's a real sliding doors moment. It is absolutely fair to say that. For me, I think it was right that Newcastle didn't sell him because Joe Gomez, valued at 45 million in that deal, just wouldn't be the answer to that centre-back situation. I know he can play at left-back as well, but for me, he just wouldn't have been the required upgrade. I don't think he's good enough. As I mentioned on my centre-back alternatives video last summer, that was part of why he had a slow start to the season. Obviously, he'd been to the Euros. He hadn't really had a break. If you think back to his man of the match performance, his confidence boosting player of the tournament under 21's performance the summer before, he came and hit the ground running that season, and I think really he's a confidence player. I think that's what we've seen. There have been some special performances from Gordon this season. You think of the Carabao Cup semi-final first leg against Arsenal, he's just a confidence player, and the fact that he got sent off in that game against Brighton, then had that injury, and then Harvey Barnes has come in and played so well, he's not had an opportunity. He needs games to get back to his absolute best. He's not one of those players who can just hit the ground running. As we saw when he first arrived, it took him time to adjust. Then he had a brilliant confidence boosting end to the season, scored that goal against Chelsea, went to that tournament, absolutely blitzed it, and then just flew into the season and never really looked back. This summer was very stop-start, didn't play very much in the Euros, hadn't had a break on top of that previous season as well, and then the Liverpool stuff, his head scrambled. It didn't really give him the best grounding for the season, and as I say, just as he was getting into a bit of form, that red card came and he's almost had to start again. So for me, I think there's a little bit of an overreaction on the Gordon stuff in terms of should he be sold. I don't think he should. I think he's the perfect player for Newcastle. I think he sets the tone with that press as well. I don't buy into this sort of need for questioning his attitude as much as people do. I think I've spoken about this before. I think people are too quick to jump on poor form as poor attitude and put two and two together about the Liverpool move from last summer and how that didn't work. Again, context with that, Newcastle were the ones who told him when he was on England duty, you might have to go to Liverpool, and he had to adjust to that. And his family are Liverpool fans. Like, that might be something that he maybe would want to do if the opportunity arose, but he's since signed a new contract. He's played really well at times this season. I think there's very little in it beyond just the fact that he's had a stop-start campaign. He's very much a confidence player. He'll be back to his best next season with a break, I'm sure. He just needs a little bit of time to get his full fitness back and full sharpness back. His touch was poor on Saturday. He deserves criticism for things like that, but I don't think he deserves his attitude fully called into question in the way it has been in the last few days. As I say, there will be a big, long piece on Gordon talking about all these issues on Forbes tomorrow as well. Thanks so much for joining me on this video. Like, share and subscribe. As I say, I really do appreciate all the support. I've got big plans for this summer, so get involved if you haven't already. And I'll see you later in the week for a video pre-Everton. That is suddenly the biggest game of the Premier League season. Cheers.